The Scottish chill clawed on my bones as I embarked on my first camping adventure. I dismissed the need for a map, naively relying on nature to guide me through the wild. The trip was a spontaneous decision, inspired by a recent breakup combined with a rabbit hole of influences finding their own peace in the wilderness. I didn't realise my lack of experience would be more than just a hindrance. I quickly became aware that I was completely out of my depth. The cold was unlike the cold I had experienced living in the north of England. It had its own special properties, most notably the ability to completely penetrate all layers of clothing and seep into the skin, inhabiting every atom of my body. The slow wind carried an unsettling tone, likened only to the chants you would typically attribute to some kind of Native American ritual. As the grey sky darkened, I got the sense that my actual destination was still a considerable length away, so counting my losses, I decided to set up camp on the first bit of land flat enough. Desperate strikes on dampened wood yielded no flame, and after half a packet of matches and an hour of effort, I abandoned any hope of a fire, instead opting to try and wrap myself up as best I could in the tent. The moon offered little light, and I hadn't the foresight to bring a torch to aid in the reading, so with no entertainment options available, I hoped my dreams would suffice until morning. But the cold made the notion of sleep impossible. As I lay shivering, the chanting started up again, a low hum that appeared to vibrate the canvas. I could see a light, the tree's shadows dancing on my tent walls. Poking my head out to investigate, I saw a fire around 50 yards from my position. I'm not the most sociable person, which is why I chose a remote area as an impulse getaway, but the bitter Scottish air prompted me to prioritise my usual feelings. I didn't care who was there, but I had to get close to the fire. I grabbed a couple of beers from my bag, hoping to use one as a peace offering, and tread towards the fire. Aside from a controlled blaze, there were no other signs of people. No tent or camping set up, just the fire. I held out my hands until my fingers regained movement, allowing me to unscrew the top of one beer. I took a seat beside the fire, watching it flicker as I waited for its creator to turn up. I drank the second beer, but there was still no one in sight. With no signs of human presence, I decided to relocate my camp. There was ample light for me to set up, and thought that I could read for an hour or so before bed, hoping to somewhat salvage what had so far been a miserable trip. Returning to my tent to retrieve my belongings, a chilling sight awaited me. A figure, garbed in Native American attire, emerged from my tent. I briefly considered making an introduction, weighing up my need to be warm against my need to not be murdered. The temperature was firmly into negative digits, but this guy was parading around in a cheap costume that barely covered his privates. My breath hitched as I cowered behind a tree, waiting for him to leave. As he walked past, I swear I caught a glimpse of what appeared to be a tomahawk slid into his belt. He made it back to the fire, where he proceeded to dance around in ritualistic fashion. By this point, I'd already concluded that I'd have to brace the darkness and the elements, and sensing that moving on would be the safest option, I hurriedly dove into my tent and began pushing everything at hand back into my rucksack. Picking up my sleeping bag, I noticed a hard lump inside. I gave it a shake and recoiled in horror as a dead badger rolled out onto my pillow. I heard a twig snap, and all of a sudden the cold was no longer an issue. Looking over towards the fire, the man was out of sight. My eyes scanned the area. I couldn't see a thing, but heard a demented war cry ringing out, getting louder. I grabbed my bag and opted to abandon the rest of my gear. I knew that if I made it out alive, I wouldn't even consider going camping again, so I wasn't going to need a tent or a sleeping bag. I took off, barely managing to navigate my way across the highlands. Even as the war cry settled, I didn't lessen my pace until the sound had completely faded. Eventually, I saw a large stone building up ahead, a solitary pub in the middle of nowhere. That's one of the UK's biggest saving graces. No matter where you are or how lost you find yourself, you're never more than a few miles away from a boozer. The lights were still on, so I knocked hard on the door. A man answered and without question invited me to sit by the fireplace. The lobby was adorned with more Native American memorabilia, flooding my mind with terrifying flashbacks. I found myself mesmerized by a poster on the wall, a framed newspaper clipping with the phrase, "Have you seen him?" written in large font. "That's Apache Andy," the innkeeper startled me from behind. I turned around and he held out a glass of whiskey. I don't normally touch the stuff, but it looked like liquid gold at this point. I told the innkeeper my story, and to my surprise, he actually found it funny. He described the details surrounding Apache Andy, who had become a local legend. The story goes, he and his brother would often use the highlands as a backdrop for their Cowboys and Indians game until his brother went missing. Andy was driven to insanity by the event until he too disappeared, although a number of sightings have been reported since. As a minute town in the middle of nowhere, the whole area knows the story, and have built a modest tourist point of interest around it. Some say he's out there looking for his brother, others say he's just a hermit. I found some solace knowing that my experience isn't entirely unique, and whilst I did harbour some sympathy, it was heavily outweighed by the disturbing sight of that dead badger and the distressing sound that will forever haunt my memory. The majesty of Yosemite unfolded before me as I ventured deeper into the heart of the national park. Spring's gentle touch breathed life into the surroundings, transforming the wilderness into a vibrant tapestry of greens and blues. The further I ventured, the fewer signs of humanity accompanied me on the journey. Hours passed without encountering a single soul, leaving me alone with nature's whispers and the rhythmic symphony of the flowing river. However, the solitude took an unexpected turn when I stumbled upon two men engaged in a heated argument by the riverbank. Their voices carried across the tranquil landscape, drawing me closer to the unfolding drama. Hidden behind trees, I observed their dispute without understanding the nature of their disagreement. As I neared, their hushed tones reached my ears. "There's no one here, who's gonna know?" one of them uttered, their words hanging in the crisp air. My curiosity shifted to unease as I noticed the absence of any camping gear or backpacks. Instead, my gaze was drawn to a humanoid structure behind them, wrapped tightly in garbage bags. They bent down at either end to pick it up, but halted their actions upon noticing my approach, their eyes fixed on me like a sniper. The weight of their stares lingered, but I dared not engage in what was none of my business. Avoiding eye contact, I silently chose to continue my journey without prying into their ominous activities. Hours later, the solitude returned as I navigated the wild terrain, the unsettling encounter with the two men lingering in the recesses of my mind. Seeking refuge for the night, I stumbled upon a captivating rock formation, stones meticulously stacked upon each other, creating a natural tower that rose 20 feet into the sky. An idea sparked into my mind, envisioning it as an ideal viewing platform. Setting up my tent at the base, I ascended the rock tower with a small bag in tow. On the summit, I marveled at the panoramic view that unfolded before me. I took out my compact stove to heat up some water for a coffee, hoping to bask in the idyllic backdrop. The tranquility was shattered as I heard subtle rustling below. My eyes narrowed, scanning the surroundings for the source of the disturbance. To my disbelief, the two men from earlier emerged from the shadows, tiptoeing around with surreptitious intent. Their gestures and facial expressions replaced spoken words, creating an atmosphere of silent malevolence. They couldn't see me perched on the rocks, but it was clear that they had followed me. I watched the intruders with growing horror. One of them, armed with a large branch, positioned himself at the entrance of my tent, the stick poised over his shoulder like a weapon waiting to strike. The other, more sinister figure produced a container of lighter fluid, liberally dousing my tent in the flammable liquid. He quickly pulled out a light, setting the tent ablaze. As the flickering flames danced, the men reveled in their destructive act. The fire's glow reflected in their eyes, a malevolent satisfaction emanating from their sinister deeds. They stood with admiration as the canvas melted, ensuring that the task was completed. The man with the branch raised his middle finger defiantly at the ashes, a vulgar gesture directed at the remnants of my violated campsite. The ominous duo lingered in the vicinity for a while. They must have realized that I wasn't a monster charred remains of my shelter, and stuck around waiting for my return. Either due to boredom or satisfied with the job well done, the two finally left. Frozen in a mix of fear and disbelief, I clung to the summit with my heart pounding, my sanctuary now a prison. I remained there for the rest of the night, whimpering and retching from the smell of burnt plastic. At the first sign of light, I prayed the encounter was over, and slowly and cautiously, I descended from my rocky refuge, avoiding any noise that might betray my presence. Obviously, as soon as signal returned to my phone, I alerted the authorities, but I've yet to receive an update. Were they really out there burying a body? And were they trying to eradicate any witnesses to their suspicious behavior? The beauty of the landscape now concealed a darker truth, and the once inviting wilderness became a realm of peril that I couldn't escape soon enough. I was a junior counsellor at a summer camp alongside one other guy, Tom. There were supposed to be 4 of us in total, 3 juniors and 1 senior. One junior didn't show, and the senior Phil called ahead, saying he wasn't going to make it for the first night, but would be there the next day. There were 6 girls and 7 boys in total, but without proper guidance, we struggled to find activities for them with just the 2 of us. As night was drawing in, we opted for the old cliché of telling scary stories by the fire. One of the boys, Max, took the lead. The group was comprised of 12 to 14-year-olds, but Max looked a lot older than the rest, even older than me. He said this was his second year at the camp, and told a chilling tale about his first year. He said one of the campers unsuccessfully tried to kill a counsellor and went missing after that. The camper in question wasn't on the register, so no one knew who he was or where he had come from. This kid was creepy, and it felt like a deliberate effort to put me on guard. Throughout the rest of the more benign stories, I could feel Max staring at me, as if he was trying to challenge my authority. As 10 p.m. approached, we instructed the campers to their respective cabins, one for the girls and one for the boys. Max lingered behind, saying there weren't enough beds for everyone. I chalked it down to poor planning, but as there was a counsellor missing, I offered him a room in the main cabin with me and Tom. Waking the next day, he was nowhere to be seen. We did a roll call for the remaining campers and found that there was another boy missing. My suspicions grew. I called Phil to inform him of the situation. He said one of us needed to go look for them and one of us needed to stay at camp and that he'd be there shortly. Tom, the other counsellor, set off on a one-man search party while I looked after the rest of the camp, setting them up with a simple bushcrafting task to distract them. Hours passed and Tom failed to return. There was a rustling emanating from the trees that surrounded us. I instructed the campers to continue while I went to investigate. As I reached the edge of the site, Max emerged, frantically running towards me with blood dripping from his head. I took no chances. I gripped him in a full Nelson and wrestled him to the ground. "What have you done?" I screamed as the rest of the camp looked on in horror. "Whoa, let him go," a concerned voice uttered. The senior counsellor had arrived, but I ignored his injunction, pushing Max's face into the mud. Max began to whimper like a child, and I relented. "Where are they?" I screamed again as he climbed to his feet. "He's done something to them, I know it." "Just calm down," Phil demanded. He looked around at the rest of the camp, tallying them up with his finger. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. He patted Max on the shoulder. 12. Everyone's here. What's the problem? He inquired with a stony look on his face. "No, there's another boy," I pleaded. His sternness turned to confusion. 6 boys, 6 girls, he said with confidence. "Not him," I retorted. "Look at him, he shouldn't be here. He's about 35. "Max was here last year," he assured me. Perplexed, I looked over at Max wiping the mud from his face, who somehow now looked his age. I honestly thought I was having some sort of breakdown. I'd counted everyone. 6 girls and 7 boys. "What happened?" Phil asked him. "I don't know," Max said, sniffling. "I couldn't sleep, so I went for a walk and woke up tied to a tree." Me and Phil exchanged glances, now firmly on the same page. He said he was calling it. I got the impression that he knew more than he was letting on, but he told me to go find Tom while he called everyone's parents to ask them to collect their children. I set off into the woods, nervously navigating my way through. My eyes darted from left to right as I swear I could hear the ominous laughter of a child. "Help!" begged a familiar voice. Following the sounds, I found Tom, tied to a tree with blood trickling from his head in the same manner that Max had described. I asked what happened as I loosened the ropes, and he told me he found the boy. As I hastily worked to free Tom from his bindings, he recounted the disturbing events that unfolded after he found the missing boy. The dense woods seemed to close in around us, casting long shadows that danced with an eerie rhythm. Tom explained how he stumbled upon the lost boy deep within the forest. The boy appeared disorientated, his eyes reflecting a palpable fear. Determined to bring him back to the safety of the camp, Tom began leading the way when an unseen force struck him from behind, shrouding his consciousness in darkness. As I listened, a knot tightened in my stomach. The pieces of this unsettling puzzle were falling into place, and the implications were chilling. Max's story about his previous year at the camp, the unsettling tales by the fire, the missing boy who wasn't on the register, all threads woven into a tapestry of disquieting uncertainty. We moved quickly back to the campsite, my mind racing to comprehend the unfolding nightmare. The senior counsellor Phil awaited our return. His face, once stony and composed, now bore traces of concern. Tom's bloodied appearance heightened the sense of urgency. Phil ushered us away from the campus, his voice lowered to a whisper. He spoke of a sinister history, an incident from the previous year that echoed in the shadows of this cursed campsite. "Last year," Phil began, his gaze fixed on the ground, "a camper tried to kill one of the counsellors. He failed, but he went missing afterward. The strange part, he wasn't on our roster, and we never found out who he was." I exchanged a glance with Tom, our disbelief mirrored in each other's eyes. The gravity of the situation began to settle as Phil continued. "Max was here during that time. He saw it all happen." Questions crowded my mind, but Phil's words cut through the fog of confusion. The pieces of the puzzle aligned with a grim precision. The missing boy, the attempted assault from the previous year, and the unrelenting shadows that clung to this forsaken campsite. It was a pattern of malevolence that transcended mere coincidence. Phil's decision was clear. The camp was cancelled and the parents were summoned to collect their children. The air thickened with tension as the truth unravelled, leaving behind a lingering sense of dread. As the campers were gathered, a solemn atmosphere envelops the once vibrant site, now tainted by the ominous secrets it harboured. The parents arrived in a flurry of anxiety, their eyes searching for reassurance that their children were unharmed. Phil, with a heavy heart, explained the inexplicable events that led to the cancellation of the camp. The weight of his words hung in the air, and the parents, though bewildered, recognized the gravity of the situation. As the last child was reunited with their family, the campsite fell into an eerie silence. Phil approached me, his eyes burdened with the truth that extended beyond the confines of the campfire tales. "There are things that happened here," he whispered, "things that go beyond our understanding. Max saw it all, and now history seems to repeat itself." The shadows deepened as night descended upon the abandoned campsite. The fire that once held tales of adventure and camaraderie now smouldered, casting a dim glow on the unsolved mysteries that lingered in the woods. In the aftermath, as I walked away from the forsaken campsite, I couldn't shake the feeling that the forest held secrets, whispers of a sinister past that refused to be forgotten. The chilling laughter of a child echoed in the wind, a haunting reminder that some tales were better left untold, and some shadows left undisturbed.